Another thing that we feel is very important here at Motion Control is wrist flexion. Patients need flexion so that they can get into the body midline to do ADLs, to comb their hair, to get into their body. Wrist flexion is very important. We have two styles of flexion units. We have the flexion wrist, and then we also have a multi-flex wrist. People ask, which applications would I use flexion versus multi-flex? If we look at the flexion wrist first, it's a positive locking wrist. So you see it locks into place in 4 different positions, two in flexion, 1 in extension, and then of course neutral. With the motion control hand, it's actually 3 positions. But that positive lock is good if I want to act upon the world. So if I want to push doors open, if I want to carry a heavy object, things where the patient is engaging and affecting the world around them. If you think about bilateral upper limb amputees, they're going to want to take the action that they're putting onto the object. They want to move it, they want it to happen. Whereas the multi-flex wrist is a 360-degree wrist and then springs back to neutral. Really nice for absorbing those motions. It locks in 3 positions, so it locks at neutral and flexion and extension. But when it's locked, it's still radial ulnar deviation compliant, so it still has that motion. It's good when the world is acting on the patient. So most doorknobs now are handles rather than knobs. And so as you move through that range of turning a doorknob, the multi-flex wrist is going to absorb that. And so that motion isn't transmitted onto the patient's residual limb. So it's more comfortable, it's more compliant. Think about riding a bike, rowing a boat, those kind of things. The multi-flex wrist will absorb those motions. Like I say, here at Motion Control, we really feel strongly about how important wrist flexion is. And just in the last few months, we came out with a brand new product, powered flexion. So now the patient can actually flex the wrist and get it into those positions to get into body midline without having to reach over with the other hand like they do with our passive wrists. It's got a large range of motion. Notice it goes into a lot of flexion so that the patient can get into midline. It also has a pause at home feature. So you see as it goes through its range, it pauses there for a moment in that one spot. Now the nice thing is the patient can adjust where in that range they want it to pause and also how long they want it to pause. So that gives the patient, without having to look at it, they know exactly where that wrist flexion is. It's also speed adjustable, so it can be screaming fast, they can slow it down so that they have better targeting. In the flexed position, it's easy to passively rotate, so they can flex it completely and then use a tabletop or their thigh to position it in rotation. Now you can combine it with our electric wrist rotator. It does end up rather long, it does add some weight, but it has been used in that applications multiple times. The length, where it's attached to the terminal device, while it does look long, the length of the powered flexion unit is the exact same length as our wrist rotator. So if you plan ahead, you can make the forearm shorter so that your overall length is still the same as if you were using a wrist rotator. It's available in with the ETD, the ETD2, and our motion control hand. The motion control electric wrist rotator is the quietest, fastest, and highest torque rotator on the market. We manufacture it in 2 different ways, the standard wrist or the pro wrist. The standard wrist doesn't have a controller or any electronics. It's gotten a lot more popular over the last couple of years. This is the wrist you would use with pattern recognition, whether using COAPT or IBT Sense system. They prefer the standard wrist rotator. With our standard wrist rotator, we also have the option of a 6-band coaxial plug. But that 6-band coaxial plug allows you to use a Tasca hand to do direct grip pattern changes. This is a really cool feature and available with our standard wrist with the 6-band coax. The wrist rotator is also available in the Pro Wrist version, so that if I give it a co-contraction, it switches to rotation, and so the controller is in the wrist so that it can read that switching signal, and you can make adjustments to the wrist totally independent of the terminal device. Very nice feature if you're using other manufacturers' devices, an iLim, a motion control hand, a Tasca hand. You can control that wrist without affecting the terminal device. Another new product that we recently came out with is a waterproof collar for our quick disconnect wrists. So our ETD and ETD2 being waterproof, we can now install this waterproof collar. It's a little bit hard to see here, but this now makes the quick disconnect wrist IPX7 waterproof. So now the device can be submerged completely down to the first opening in the socket. So now a patient can reach into a sink full of dishes. You can reach in and pull a fish out of the lake without worrying about getting the quick disconnect wet. It is optional. It's a minimal cost. A key point is it must be used with the motion control end cap, so they work together as a unit. You can use any other manufacturer's device with our end cap. With a ETD or an ETD2 with the waterproof collar installed, you cannot use that on our older end caps or with other manufacturers' wrist units. So keep that in mind when you're using the waterproof collar. But with our new end cap, it's seamless, goes together. Now I've created a waterproof wrist, and a lot more peace of mind for the patient if they get caught in a heavy rainstorm, they're around water washing their car. Nice little feature.